All right, let me figure out this microphone real quick. I promised, for those of you who were here earlier today, I said when I was asked to give 2 talks here, one on Afghanistan, which I'm kind of like a wind-up doll in Afghanistan. You just kind of pull the string and I can talk about it. The question I had earlier today was on faith and military service, which intellectually was a more difficult question for me to answer. And so I promised to approach that question with a degree of humility. One moment. With a degree of humility, but I promised to be back to my normal arrogant self once this afternoon's talk came around. The reality, however, though, is that Afghanistan is a deeply humbling country. The environment there is humbling not only for armies, just ask the British or the Soviets or the Americans, but also for researchers. Second, I'm actually by training, I'm not a Central Asia specialist. I am I'm an Arabist by training, I guess, from all the time that I've spent in Lebanon and Cairo and Tangier. Really, when it comes down to my regional expertise or specialization that I've developed, it really has to do with the Arabic-speaking world. I am, however, from East Tennessee, which like Afghanistan, is mountainous, lawless, and plagued by heavily armed religious fundamentalists. So I come to this region of the globe quite honestly. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk you through a couple things. First off, I'm going to talk you through the war in Afghanistan from the perspective of U.S. policy as well as from NATO ISAF operations over the past 12 months. And I'm going to talk theoretically from something that at least should be in my wheelhouse, to use a baseball term. And Jonathan, where are you? You asked, you were surprised by the number of Yankee fans in 2003 in Iraq, but keep in mind there was a heavy Al-Qaeda presence in Iraq in that year. So, but I'm going to talk through counterinsurgency, kind of it's in theory and then in practice as it's being executed on the ground in Afghanistan. So this has been a pretty monumental year with respect to America's involvement in Afghanistan. We started with a new president, a president who vowed to make Afghanistan the central front in the so-called war on terror, or at least America's chief military exercise abroad. This took place, it was in Beirut until December of last year, or December 2008 rather. And was called back to work on a larger strategic planning exercise that General Petraeus was running and U.S. Central Command. But at the same time, reviews of the war in Afghanistan were taking place there, within the White House, within the National Security Council. And then there was a larger kind of AFPAC review that took place in January and February of last year, if you'll remember, and that resulted in a white paper that was issued in March, outlining the president's strategy for Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as a list of strategic goals. Now, war takes place at 4 different levels. It takes place at the political, the strategic, the operational, and the tactical. What was articulated in March was our war aims at the political and strategic level. So we're saying our policy, which is that Afghanistan and Pakistan will not be safe havens from which transnational terror groups can strike against the United States and its Western allies. And then a list of subordinate strategic goals. Here's how we're going to do that. And it included everything from robust counterinsurgency tactics to increased civilian expertise on the ground in Iraq, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as a diplomatic effort. I traveled to Afghanistan then this past summer when General Stanley McChrystal, who was my last boss in the U.S. Army when he was the head of the Special Operations Task Force in Afghanistan, I headed back to Afghanistan this past summer to work on his initial assessment of the war. Some of you may remember this was leaked in the Washington Post last fall. Bob Woodward leaked it. The 66 pages of their report, out of the first 22 pages were basically how I spent my summer. So after 2 operational tours in Afghanistan, one as a lowly light infantry platoon leader, one as a lowly ranger platoon leader, and then I went back to grad school and became a full-time nerd. I came back to Afghanistan with kind of a fresh set of eyes, having actually looked at the conflict in southern Lebanon for the past 5 years, and then went back to looking at Afghanistan. When we went there, General McChrystal was pretty clear. He said, look, I don't think anything, what we're going to do is we're going to pursue a population-centric counterinsurgency strategy. And the reason that I'm going to pursue that is because, quite honestly, I don't think anything else is going to work at this point. General McChrystal was in charge of our Direct Action Special Operations Task Force for the past, the 4 years previous to that. The man didn't think we could kill our way out of the war in Afghanistan, largely because he had already tried. And that is one of the things that we had been trying to do over the past 2 years. So he decided that we were going to conduct a population-centric counterinsurgency strategy, which he thought was in line with the policy and strategic goals that the president had laid out in March. Again, I talk about war taking place at 4 different levels. What we then had to do was figure out, okay, how are we going to operationalize the president's strategy? How are we going to think about how we're exactly going to accomplish the strategic goals that he set out, and what resources are necessary? So at the basic level, strategy is goals plus resources, right? And the president can give strategic goals, but then we have to think about, all right, how are we going to do that, and what resources are necessary? We put back up a resource request, and then you establish your strategy.